My name is Rachel Morgan. And while surgeons were cutting into my body during an emergency operation, my parents abandoned my two little children completely alone at the hospital. Flushed heartbreak. Not because of an emergency. Not because someone died. Because my younger sister suddenly needed help choosing a hairstyle appointment for her engagement photos. I still remember waking up after surgery week, terrified, barely able to breathe. Only to hear a nurse whisper, "Ma'am, your children have been crying alone for almost 2 hours." At first I thought there had to be some misunderstanding. But then my 6-year-old son grabbed my hand and asked through tears, "Mommy, why did Grandma leave us again?" And in that exact moment, something inside me finally broke forever. But what happened 3 days later destroyed my parents' perfect image in front of the entire family. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 34 years old, a single mother of 2 children, and for most of my life, I spent every waking second trying to earn love from parents who freely gave it to my younger sister instead. Her name was Chloe, and in my family, Chloe was the center of the universe. Always. Growing up, Chloe received everything effortlessly. Dance classes, vacations, attention. Meanwhile, I learned early that being the responsible daughter meant sacrificing constantly. If Chloe forgot homework, Mom defended her. If I made mistakes, Dad lectured me for hours. And somehow, I convinced myself that was normal family behavior. Even as adults, nothing changed. When my marriage collapsed after my husband cheated repeatedly, my parents barely comforted me. Mom actually sighed and said, "You should have tried harder to keep your family together." Meanwhile, when Chloe broke up with a boyfriend after 3 months, my parents practically organized emotional recovery therapy for her. Still, despite everything, I kept trying. Because children raised on conditional love become adults addicted to approval. By 34, I worked exhausting hours as a pediatric nurse while raising my son Mason and daughter Ellie alone. Money stayed tight constantly, but my children were my entire world. And honestly, they gave me the kind of unconditional love I spent my whole childhood begging for. Then suddenly everything changed medically. One afternoon during work, I collapsed from severe abdominal pain. Within hours, doctors discovered I needed emergency surgery immediately. I was terrified, not even for myself, for my kids, because I had no reliable babysitter available quickly. So against my better judgment, I called my parents. Mom answered, sounding annoyed immediately. "We're helping Chloe prepare for engagement photos today." I nearly cried from pain while whispering, "Mom, I need surgery." Silence. Then finally she sighed dramatically. "Fine, we'll watch the kids for a few hours." Even then, she sounded inconvenienced, but I ignored the feeling because I had no other choice. At the hospital, Mason clung tightly to me crying. Ellie kept asking whether I was going to die. Meanwhile, my parents looked impatient sitting in the waiting room. Mom spent more time texting Chloe than comforting the children. Dad barely looked up from his phone. Still, before nurses wheeled me into surgery, I grabbed Mom's hand desperately. "Please don't leave them alone." She rolled her eyes slightly. "Rachel, stop being dramatic." Those were the last words I heard before anesthesia pulled me unconscious. When I finally woke up hours later, everything hurt. My stomach burned. My throat felt dry. Machines beeped around me softly. Then I heard crying. Tiny crying. Mason. The second I opened my eyes fully, I saw both my children sitting alone near the hospital wall, terrified. No parents. No grandparents. Nobody. Just my 6-year-old son trying to comfort his little sister by himself. Panic rushed through my body instantly. I whispered weakly, "Where's Grandma?" A nurse nearby looked uncomfortable immediately. Then quietly she answered, "Your parents left about 2 hours ago." I stared at her in disbelief. "They what?" Apparently Chloe called crying because her hairstylist appointment for engagement pictures got moved earlier unexpectedly. So my parents left the hospital immediately to help her choose hairstyles and outfits. And they left my children alone in a surgical waiting room. Completely alone. My daughter Ellie ran toward my bed sobbing, "Mommy, we thought something bad happened to you." I started crying instantly despite the pain tearing through my stomach. Because no child should experience that fear. Especially not because adults prioritize vanity over responsibility. Then Mason whispered something that shattered me completely. Grandma said Aunt Chloe needed her more. That sentence broke years of buried pain open all at once. Because suddenly I realized something horrifying. My children were now experiencing the exact same emotional neglect I suffered growing up. And I refused allowing that cycle continue. That evening my parents finally returned acting irritated instead of apologetic. Mom entered carrying shopping bags casually. Relax, the kids were fine. Fine. My children cried alone believing their mother might die during surgery. Dad even seemed annoyed when I confronted them. Chloe's engagement photos are important too. That word nearly made me scream. Because somehow my emergency surgery became emotionally equal to hair appointments. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to understand them. Instead I became angry. Real angry. The next several days at home were painful physically and emotionally. My best friend Natalie helped care for the kids while I recovered. Not my parents. They barely called. But social media. Completely different story. Mom posted endless glamorous photos helping Chloe prepare for engagement events. Perfect smiles. Luxury salon visits. Family dinners. Meanwhile nobody publicly mentioned abandoning two terrified children at a hospital. And honestly, that hypocrisy enraged me more than the abandonment itself. Then came Sunday family dinner. Usually I skipped confrontation to keep peace. But after what happened, peace no longer mattered. So despite still recovering painfully from surgery, I attended. The entire family gathered celebrating Chloe's engagement plans loudly. Mom showed off hairstyle photos proudly. Dad joked about wedding expenses. Meanwhile my children sat unusually quiet beside me. Then my Aunt Denise suddenly smiled at my parents warmly. Rachel is lucky having you both during surgery. The room fell silent instantly. Because suddenly everyone looked toward me. And for the first time in my entire life, I told the truth publicly. Calmly. Clearly. Actually they abandoned Mason and Ellie alone at the hospital so Chloe could make a hair appointment. Silence exploded across the room. Forks stopped moving. Faces froze. Mom looked horrified instantly. Not guilty. Embarrassed. Dad snapped aggressively. This is not the time. No, I interrupted quietly. It's exactly the time. Then I looked directly at my relatives. My 6-year-old son sat beside my unconscious body believing I might die because my parents prioritized engagement photos. My aunt covered her mouth shocked. Several relatives stared at my parents in disbelief. Then Mason softly whispered beside me. I was scared. That tiny sentence destroyed the room emotionally. Because hearing fear from a child hits differently than adult arguments. Even Chloe looked uncomfortable now. Then unexpectedly, my grandmother spoke. Very softly, but powerfully. I warned you both years ago about favoritism. Nobody answered. Because everyone suddenly saw the truth clearly. Not just one bad decision. A lifetime pattern. Mom burst into tears immediately trying to defend herself. We were overwhelmed. But this time, nobody rushed to comfort her. Because abandoning children during surgery isn't misunderstanding. It's selfishness. That dinner permanently changed our family dynamics. For the first time ever, relatives stopped excusing my parents' behavior publicly. And honestly, my parents hated losing control of the narrative more than losing me emotionally. Over the next few months, I created distance intentionally. Less calls, less visits, stronger boundaries, and slowly, something incredible happened. I started healing emotionally, not because my parents changed instantly. Because I finally stopped begging people to love me correctly. Meanwhile my children flourished without constant emotional comparison around them. Mason became more confident. Ellie stopped asking why Grandma loved Aunt Chloe more. That alone made every painful boundary worth it. Then 6 months later, Mom showed up unexpectedly at my house crying. Apparently Chloe moved across the country after marriage and suddenly stopped depending on them constantly. And for the first time ever, my parents experienced emotional emptiness without their favorite child nearby. Mom whispered through tears, I think we failed you. I looked at her quietly for a long moment. Then answered honestly, yes, you did. Not cruelly, just truthfully. Sometimes healing starts only after truth becomes unavoidable. Today I'm 36 years old. My scars from surgery faded mostly. But the emotional lesson stayed forever. Family is not defined by titles like mother or grandfather. Family is the people who stay when you're vulnerable, the people who protect your children, the people who show up when life becomes painful. And sometimes, the strongest thing a daughter can do is finally stop accepting crumbs of love from people capable of giving more. Favoritism inside families creates wounds that often continue into the next generation. Children notice who shows up for them during painful moments. And love without responsibility is not real love at all. Sometimes setting boundaries with family is not cruelty. It's protection. If this story touched your heart, thumbs up, like this video. Bell subscribe for more emotional stories. Speech balloon comment below. Would you forgive parents who abandoned your children during surgery? Flushed heartbreak.